Let's cross now live to the courtroom where our reporter Chriselda has been keeping a very close eye on proceedings. A very detailed testimony kicking off there by Sergeant Patrick Mthethwa.
Well, that's right, Naledi. Sergeant Patrick Mthethwa was one of the first police officers who had arrived at the scene. He tells this court that they received a call over radio control at about 20:53 on the night that Senzo Meyiwa was killed. He was with his colleague, was a police officer as well, described as Mthethwa. We understand that he is, or Matebula in fact, who is due to be the next police officer, we understand, to take the stand. He says after they received a call over radio control, they took about 8 to 10 minutes to arrive at the crime scene. And when they arrived there, they were met by Themba, who he says is a man who described himself as an uncle and is the brother to the owner of the house. So what we can deduce from that at this particular stage is this is possibly an uncle or a brother to Gladys Khumalo, who is the owner of the house where Senzo Meyiwa was killed. So Mthethwa basically says when they arrived, they were welcomed by this uncle called Themba, and that very briefly gone inside the house. He says that Themba was in possession of the keys and had opened the house for them. That briefly gone in through the kitchen door, and he says it somewhat looks like an open plan. As you go through the kitchen, you'd also be able to see the dining room. He says at the time, what they could deduce was that they didn't know whether whatever incident had taken place, they had taken place inside or outside. But what they had seen near the dining room is 2 beer cans. Now, you remember this is not the first time that this has come up. Maggie Peary, who we also heard through one of the statements read out here in court, was the one who is understood to have been cleaning up beer bottles, according to one of the statements, inside the house after the incident had taken place. We're also hearing now about 2 beer cans from this current witness, which he says he saw towards the dining room area. He says they didn't stay long because when they asked Themba what had taken place, Themba had said he didn't know much, but someone has been shot and that person has been taken to the hospital. He then says as they came out of the house, they saw a number of people standing outside, including some of the neighbors. The neighbors then basically told him that there were 2 people who ran towards the nearby park. And when they went to the park to go and have a look, they didn't find anything and went towards the hospital where Senzo Meyiwa was taken to. On arrival there, he says at the gate at the hospital, they found a BMW and there were 2 women inside. And the one on the passenger seat had opened the window and had asked them if they were coming to the hospital. And when he was asked about perhaps why you would have just anyone asking why or were they coming to the hospital, they were wearing uniform at the time. And basically, they went inside. When they got inside, they found a lady who had introduced herself as Makhumalo. But before that, they'd also gone to a nurse, and it's that nurse that showed them where Senzo Meyiwa was. He says when he saw Senzo Meyiwa, Senzo was lying on the bed, and he pointed inside court, saying he'd seen a bullet hole here. So describing to us what he had seen when he had seen Senzo Meyiwa's lifeless body on that bed. Mthethwa says on arrival there, they met Makhumalo, but had also gone to a nurse. And when they arrived with the nurse had taken them to where Senzo Meyiwa was, describing that this is where he had been shot. So we're going to hear a lot more testimony after this tea break, in that he was one of the first police officers to arrive at that scene. He also says then, after he had seen Senzo Meyiwa, Makhumalo then said or agreed to take them back to the house, and he then left with Makhumalo and his colleague to the house. We're going to hear a lot more detail now about what happened after they arrived at the house. What did they see? Because you would know a lot that has come under question here is how the first responders to the crime had dealt with the crime scene. What did they find? How was it cordoned off? Was there anyone moved to a certain section of the house, or so that police were able to properly do their work on the scene. So that's certainly what is going to come under the spotlight. We know that after this testimony by Mthethwa, we're expecting another police officer who was with him at the time that that call was received, who travelled with him to Gladness Khumalo's home, who went with him to the hospital and also went back with him to the house again after they'd come from the hospital. So we're expecting some of that evidence to be corroborated between those two police officers who were some of the first responders to this particular crime. And certainly what we're going to get from this, you would know that in the previous testimony of the first state witness, Thabo Mosia, a lot has pointed to what police did and did not do when they arrived at that crime scene. So we're expecting a lot of that to be under the spotlight in terms of what these police officers did when they got to the scene. What did they find? What did they investigate? What did they not investigate? Were any swabs taken from any of the individuals inside that house? As you would have heard from Thabo Mosia, he indicated as a forensic detective, no swabs were taken from those individuals that were inside the house when Senzo Meyiwa was killed. So a lot of focus, again today, expected to be on the crime scene and what police did and did not do on the night that Senzo Meyiwa was killed. Yeah,
and those details will continue to come forward, as well as that testimony by Patrick Mthethwa. Sergeant Patrick Mthethwa continues that there. Our reporter, Chriselda Lewis, keeping a close eye on things for us in court.